Can you hear my kids yelling at each other? Hold on. They're fighting over the new puppy. Oh my God, I think I might have to go. I'm going to put the phone down for a moment. Hold on.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 228. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for everyone who's reached out over the past few weeks to extend well wishes and prayers for me and my family. Things are settling down a bit. We're not back in our house yet. Still, I don't know, maybe 4 or 6 weeks out before that's a possibility. We'll see. But we're getting there. Things are improving. And thank you, just a huge thank you to the members of the Reformation Gun Club, the men and women who make this show possible. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener funded. That means we have no advertising. It means that we rely on the contributions, the generous contributions of the men and women who value what we do and put their money where their mouth is, and they make a monthly donation as a member of the Reformation Gun Club. I want to thank specifically this week Dallas and Kevin and Luke and Mark, Mike, Greg, Donnie, Edwin, Philip, and the disreputable Bartlett, and everyone who makes an effort to support the show and through their generous contributions, the members of what we call the Reformation Gun Club. What these people do every month, despite all the crazy economic situation in the country, is just overwhelming to me, and I really do appreciate the support. It makes it possible for us to continue to do this, to pay for hosting, to pay for services and maintenance on the website and equipment and all that good stuff. And you can join these people too, as well if you value what we do here, if you enjoy the show and you'd like to see it continue. It really does help us to keep things going. Even $1 a month is greatly appreciated. Check all the details out at armedlutheran.us/gun club. We've got some really cool benefits for members, exclusive content in addition to the weekly show. We release new content every week. There's early access to the show, plus invitations to our monthly online hangouts, which we haven't done in a couple of months, I admit, because of the craziness going on with my house. But making plans to put together a hangout probably in the next couple of weeks for the month of August 2020. So stay tuned for that. Again, thank you to all the members, and if you would like to join them, visit armedlutheran.us/gun club to find out all the details and hopefully sign up and join them as well. All right, what have we got for you today? This is our variety show week, and what that means for those of you who are new to the show, we normally alternate our formats from one week to the next. One week we have what we call our Clinging to God and Guns show with myself and Pastor John Bennett. You would have heard that if you listened last week to episode 227. And then this week, we have our variety show with tips and rants from the entire cast, including Mia Anstein, Sergeant Bill Sylvia, and Pastor John Bennett. Pastor Bennett, however, is not going to be with us this week. He's been taking care of some personal stuff all week, and he's got a funeral, unfortunately, at his church, so he's preparing for that, and got an extra sermon to write and service to prepare for. So keep Pastor Bennett and the congregation at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota, in your prayers. And Lord willing, he'll be back with us next week for episode 229, when we'll do another Clinging to God and Gun show. Before we get started with our segments from Mia and Sergeant Bill, I thought I wanted to just sort of share some thoughts on something that's been on my mind for a while. I've been trying to kind of tie the strings together in my mind to present something to you, and I thought I would share it today. Of course, unless you're completely clueless or you're Jerry the Waddler Nadler, the country's been going through a bit of an upheaval, to say the least, lately. Everywhere you turn, people are determined to destroy the country's history, erase any statues or imagery that they find offensive, to destroy the institutions that most Americans cherish and hold dear. And what has been going through my mind recently is the sort of parallels to the various iconoclastic controversies throughout the history of the church. Iconoclasm, for those of you who don't understand or don't know the term, have never run across it, it's the act of attacking cherished beliefs or traditional institutions, particularly it's used particularly in relation to religion, where one group of a particular religion will destroy the imagery or the institutions that are held dear, that are cherished by another part of that same religion. The first of these controversies in the Christian church began in the 8th century during the reign of Byzantine Emperor Leo III, who issued some edicts against the veneration of images. And basically it was a concern that the use of icons and certain religious imagery was leading people to idolatry. It's sort of it's one of the things that Luther was concerned about when he spoke out against the church in the 16th century. And during the Reformation, while Luther was in hiding, another reformer, one of his contemporaries, Andreas Karlstadt, was taking over the reins of the Reformation and taking it on a rather radical turn. And he merged Lutheran theology and doctrine with that of the Anabaptist movement and Reformed movements, and instructed his followers to go out and just destroy imagery, crucifixes and paintings and statues and icons and stained glass depictions of Christ. Well, Luther got wind of this and got kind of ticked off, and that's sort of what drew him out of hiding, because he was worried that this change in the Reformation was going to lead people astray. And he came out of hiding to sort of steer the Reformation back on course, and he even wrote a treatise against the heavenly prophets, I believe it's called, where he addressed specifically this iconoclastic controversy within the Reformation. The confusion here at the time, and this sort of continues to this day, is a misreading of the commandments. It still separates the Lutheran traditions from the Reformed traditions even to this day, and it's a specific misreading of the first commandment. You shall have no other gods. And basically, if you understand Lutheran theology and Lutheran doctrine, Luther interpreted the commandments more broadly than the very specific you shall and you shall nots. So, for example, and this is something that we talk about a lot on the show, is the fifth commandment, for example, is not just a prohibition against murder. It's a prohibition against not helping your neighbor and saving not protecting your neighbor from harm. You're called through the fifth commandment not only to not hurt your neighbor, but also to protect them from physical danger. You're not only called in the sixth commandment, for example, to not cheat on your wife, but you're also called to not encourage your friends to do it either. Or you're also encouraged to help your neighbors stay in their marriage and strengthen their marriage. So it's more than just the specific you shall and you shall nots. And with the first commandment, it's not just a you shall have no other gods. It's you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength. And that means, in practice, it means you should not pray to saints, for example. You shouldn't pray to your ancestors or to some other intercessor besides Christ. And you should avoid the adoration of relics and icons. You definitely shouldn't melt down all your gold jewelry and cast it into a statue of a cow and start worshiping it. That doesn't mean that you make a separate, that the command to not venerate or worship graven images is not separate from the idea that you should love God above all things. They're basically the same. That's the way that we look at it. That, to me, if you look at the commandments, that's the correct way to think about it. But the Reformed take the adoration of images, the idea of idolatry, and they make their own commandment out of it. They make it the second commandment. So not only you shall love the Lord your God, you should have no other gods, but also you should not make any graven images, which to me is just a distinction without a difference. The radical reformers like Karlstadt read this command to make no graven images, and instead of including it in the first commandment, they broke it out and applied it to any image, not just the golden calf, but any image you should destroy. Not only should you not build or worship the golden calf, you shouldn't put Jesus on stained glass windows in your church, in his church, where you're worshiping him. Doesn't make sense to me. And it didn't make sense to Luther. The parallels, though, I find this interesting, the parallels to today's iconoclasts and the 15th, 16th century iconoclasts are kind of uncanny. The righteous anger and protests that we've seen here in this country that are aimed at creating a more just and equitable society have been hijacked by a more radical Reformation, where there should be and can be a reasonable discussion about Confederate imagery and statues, and especially where those statues were built as kind of a thumb in the eye of freed slaves. There really should be a rational discussion about this, but we can't when the radical reformers of today are seeking to destroy every image related not just to the Confederacy, but to the nation's history. I mean, it's one thing to tear down a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest or Robert E. Lee. It's another to destroy the statue of Ulysses S. Grant, the general who defeated the slaveholding South, or to deface and damage the statue of Abraham Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial, the president who actually freed the slaves. Statues of abolitionists we've seen being destroyed. And for those of you in Rio Linda, the abolitionists were people who opposed slavery, who fought to free slaves. We've seen those statues destroyed. We've seen monuments to black soldiers, people who actually fought, not just protested in the streets and screamed and looted stores, people who put their lives on the line to fight for the Union against the slave-holding South. We've seen their monuments destroyed and defaced. Just as the early Calvinist reformers sought to destroy all images of Christ rather than preaching against the sin of idolatry, modern iconoclasts are seeking to destroy images of America's past rather than confronting and learning from America's history and the struggles that we've had throughout the years with race. The frenzy to destroy the old and replace it with a whitewashed new future, and pardon the pun there, it's the same today as it was 500 years ago. Any offensive image has to be destroyed, even if the destroyers know nothing at all about the person whose image that they're destroying or removing. Karlstadt, once a friend of Luther, took his Reformation, took Luther's Reformation, and ran it completely off the rails, abandoning reform for schism and taking the focus off the errors of the church and putting that focus on infighting between different factions. Today, we see Black Lives Matter and Antifa hijacking the protests, the rightful, angry, the righteous protest over police brutality and racial inequality. They have hijacked those protests to the point that a nation that 4 months ago was completely unified in its anger over the death of George Floyd is now bitterly divided like never before. And most people have forgotten how this thing even started. Like the Reformation 500 years ago, we've abandoned reform in favor of struggle. The church continues to this day in many of the errors that concerned Luther in 1517. In fact, many of the changes that were brought about by the so-called radical reformers like Calvin and Zwingli have created even more errors and even more division. The nation, this nation, despite all the virtue signaling, continues to be a place where blacks feel disenfranchised. And the riots and the looting and the vandalism and the destruction brought about by the radical reformers of today have created even deeper divisions. And they're not solving the problem. The evil of slavery was a necessary evil. Now, Senator Tom Cotton has gotten into, he's been chastised in the media for suggesting this, but this is the truth. And people who don't understand our history, that's exactly, their response to Senator Cotton's comments recently are exactly what you would expect from idiots. Slavery was a necessary evil that our founders unfortunately kicked down the road in order to maintain unity as they faced the prospect of the revolution against the United Kingdom, the greatest military power in the world. We would not be a free country today if they had tried to solve slavery at the same time, because the southern states would not have stayed unified with the northern states, and we would never have been able to defeat the British. But that's a fact that's a part of our history, and it's something that we need to come to terms with. Our nation and our history are not perfect. No nation is. But we've made great progress in our short history, and there is, of course, more that we can do. But history is not something that you sanitize and erase. It's something that you learn from. It's something that you measure yourself against. You can't critique history based on modern morals. You understand that times were different. You can see how much we've changed. But if you hide yourself away from what you consider to be the evils of the founding, if you hide yourself away from those things, those difficult decisions that were made back then, and the things that the lives that those people led, and the decisions that they made, and if you criticize them because they just don't hold up to today's standard, and you forget about all that history, there's nothing to measure our progress against, and we'll constantly be in a state of struggle. We are now further today away from unity in Christ as a result of the Radical Reformation 500 years ago. And just like that, we are much further away today in this country from the social and political unity that we should be seeking. We're further away from that than we were just 4 months ago after the death of George Floyd. And it's all because of the radicals who are pushing the narrative right now. There's an old saying that we've repeated on the show and you've heard it 1,000 times. Those that forget their history are doomed to repeat it. What about those who are determined to erase their history? What happens to them? Well, that's what's been on my mind this week. And let me know your thoughts. Visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Send me a voicemail, a voice message, or an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio, and leave us a comment. I would love to hear from you on this issue or any other. And of course, if you heard last week's show or several of the previous Clinging to God and Guns segments, we'd love to hear your questions and your comments and to respond to them on the show. So send them on. We'd love to hear it. All right, that's enough from me today. Sit back, enjoy the rest of the show. Mia and Sergeant Bill are up next, and I will talk to you next week.
Time now for Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey there. Oh my goodness. Is summer flying by or what? It certainly is, and that means in my world that it's almost hunting season. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some hunting rifles and some statistics that are happening. In the last segment that I shared, I talked to you about statistics for handguns, and what I didn't tell you about were calibers and the top selling calibers for new handguns. And so I'm going to share that with you real quick before we get into a little bit about hunting. The top 10 revolver calibers are .357 Magnum, .22 long rifle, and .44 Magnum. This is something that has to do with self-defense as well as tradition, and they may be some calibers that you're interested in for your self-defense gun, or maybe you're just a collector like I am and you need to add something to your repertoire. That may be how you decide which caliber you want to use. When we're looking at 1911 and semi-auto calibers, the top 10 for those are .45 ACP, 9mm Luger, and .380 ACP. The .380 doesn't surprise me at all because a lot of times people are looking for the size of the actual handgun, and to get a smaller handgun, you go to smaller caliber. When we look at the other sizes beyond that, the 9mm tends to be more popular because of recoil, but there's the ever-going argument over what is better, 9mm or 45 or 40, and so this kind of surprised me that 45 was at the top of the list, but hey, these are statistics, and I guess it's winning the argument right now. So I just wanted to share that with you before we talk hunting, because hunting is coming right up. You can hunt with a handgun. However, if you're going to hunt with a handgun, you have to look at your state's regulations as far as the muzzle velocity, and you may have to look at the number of rounds you're allowed to carry while you're hunting. Check those out. I do know in Colorado that .380 would not be okay for hunting big game, nor would a .22. So check that out if you're planning to hunt big game. I have used 45s and I've used 9mm, and it just depends on what state. I've actually used a 10mm when I was in Florida on a private land hunt, so that was kind of exciting and fun. The thing with handguns and hunting is it tests you on your safety. It tests you on your draw, and it tests you on your aim. So you definitely want to practice before you head out on a handgun hunt. Go to the range and practice your draw, practice aiming, and practice at a variety of distances. I personally think handgun hunting is a great way to practice for self-defense, as well as put some healthy meals on the table. So just an idea. Next, I'm going to talk to you about bolt action rifles, because most big game hunters are going to be using bolt action rifles. The top sellers, Remington 700. The Remington 700 action is in all kinds of firearms, and it's something that is very popular. It's a safe action. Another really popular one, which is number 2 on the top seller list this year, is the Browning X-Bolt, and then you have the Ruger American. Those are the top 3 best sellers this year. And then if we look into calibers for rifles, this is something that you need to look at depending on if you're using these for hunting. I'm talking hunting now. If you're going to use these for hunting, you've got to look at the caliber and you've got to look at what game you're going to pursue. So the top sellers, I'm just going to give you the top 3. And these statistics are from January of 2020 through June of 2020. So this is a current, as of today, when I'm recording this, 6.5 Creedmoor is the number 1 seller. And I will say that is a trendy caliber. It's a nice flat shooter. You do need to keep an eye out for what big game you're hunting, because it, in my experience, has been one that is notorious depending on what projectile you put on the front of that, depending what bullet you use and how it expands. This is the same for handguns. You got to know what projectile you have on top of that bullet. But 6.5, if you don't have the right projectile on there, you're going to have some lost game. The number 2 one, 308 Win. So a 308 Winchester is a very popular round. It's a little heavier, has a little more knockdown power, and again, depends what load you're using, what weights, and all of that. The number 3 bestseller is 22 Long Rifle, and this is actually, I think, is great, and it's not for big game hunting, but you can use that 22 to practice for big game hunting. You can practice at targets, you can practice at small game. Here in our area, plinking at prairie dogs is a great way to practice your muscle memory, practice acquiring your target, and practice trigger control. Those are the top sellers, and that's some little bit of insight for big game hunting. If you have questions, reach out to me at my Facebook, Mia Anstein, Instagram, Twitter. You can comment to me anywhere you'd like, and you can also join the Reformation Gun Club and share any comments or questions there. Have a good one. I'll be back with some shotgun stuff next time. Talk to you later. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia, watch her YouTube videos, or check out her podcast, Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah, at miaanstein.com. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to talk to you about instructors. There's lots of different firearms instructors you can go to and get taught lots of information. And I've been to a bunch of different ones in competitive shooting arenas, in law enforcement, military. And recently I had a discussion with some guys and we were talking about different instructors and classes we've taken, and there's always that one guy that just has only been to so-and-so school and they're completely right and everybody else is wrong, and that just blows me away. So let's talk about instructors. First of all, there's no one right way to do any shooting skills. There's better ways, some not as good, but if it works for you, it works for you. And the only way you're going to ever find out is if you try it. And the second thing is, like I said before, don't take a single instructor's word as it's the only way to do something. Get instruction from several different people, whether it's, handgun shooters or rifle shooters or whatever, and whether they're competition or law enforcement backgrounds, and take what they tell you and put it all in your toolbox. Figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Practice the things that work and make sense to you, and move along. Another thing about those instructors, they've probably changed their minds on their techniques and the way they've done things probably 5 or 6 times in the last 10 to 20 years, if they've been shooting that long. So if they're trying to tell you that their way is the best way and the only way, that should send up a red flag. So One of the things I've always told people is if you're going to take firearms instruction classes, always find out who the instructor is. Find out their base of knowledge, whether they were law enforcement or they were military or competition shooter or whatever it may be. Each doesn't necessarily make them an expert or even a good instructor, but you can still get good instruction from somebody who's only been in law enforcement or somebody who's only been in the military. But it's been my experience that military resumed instructors know a lot about rifle and don't know a whole lot about shooting pistol. And law enforcement used to be kind of the opposite. Police instructors knew a lot about pistol and couldn't tell you much about a rifle. So I guess what I'm really saying is vet your instructors so that you know what you're getting into and what they're going to teach you. Now, shooting is shooting. Whether you're a competitive shooter or a tactical shooter, it doesn't matter. You're going to get into these classes and you're going to learn the basis of knowledge that they have. So if you go to a Rob Latham class, you're going to learn how to shoot like a competitive shooter. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't give you value as a concealed carrier or law enforcement or any other tactical shooting discipline. Now, if you go to a ex-Green Beret Ranger SEAL Ninja class, and he's trying to tell you that the only way to shoot the pistol is this way, go with it, practice it, see if it works for you. If it works, great, but add it into your toolbox. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say is take classes from anybody you can, increase your knowledge base, and practice. And take what they teach you and practice it and vet it yourself. Find out what works for you and what doesn't. I'm left-handed. There's a lot of right-handed instructors that can't teach me how to do things as a lefty because they have no frame of reference. Now, in all the classes I've been to, I've always made it a point to try and pick up a couple things from every instructor to put in my toolbox. So it make me a better shooter all around, whether it's handgun, competitively, tactical shooting, concealed carry, rifle, shotgun, whatever it may be. So keep on practicing. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.